today we're going to be diving deeper into the UI part of the whole experience. The UI part, called user interface, is a very important element of the whole experience, as any of your information that you want to display to the users that is very interactive can be built using the UI. For example, if you have products, if you have information available on clicking some CTA, and you want to show it to the user, or you want the user to allow to buy some products, you have to use or utilize the UI layer to do that. Continuing on the UI, let's talk about what you get out of the box. So if you are creating an experience on the dev creator dashboard tools, you'll notice that whenever you get an experience, when you open it, whether you embed it via the iframe or the SDK, you are given a standard UI, which is basically built by Empiria. Now, the reason for creating the UI as a separate element is that, first of all, is that you can very easily swap out user interface. Like if you don't want our standard UI to be your user interface, you can build your own and then place it in there. You can use React, Vue, Angular, or any other modern library to build your own user interface and make it interact with the API. We'll go about building your own and enabling it to communicate with the SDK later on in this video. But for right now, we'll be starting with understanding what does the standard UI have, and what does it offer, and how can you fork it to speed up your development with a lot of UI elements already built for you. With the standard UI, it is a repository that is public and you can get it in the description. It contains all of the code to get you started with a pre-built library, UI library with React and Chakra, and you can use this kickstart and speed up your development. Let's just jump into the standard UI. Standard UI is basically a code base that comprises of a lot of pre-built UI elements and all of the out-of-the-box required connections to the SDK, which are required to talk to the SDK actually, and then talk back to the UI from the SDK. As you can see, with standard UI, you get a lot of things. You get your a lot of states where you can control your active language, your active scene, what sound displaying, is your product drawer open or not, and then what is the active tab and all that jazz, right? And your iframe draw data, media draw data, a lot of components that are built out of the box. Even you get an AR viewer. Um, then there's your welcome model, your audio model, and all that jazz, right? To start off with it, it basically has an app.tsx where everything is comprised. Basically, your use effect where we make the connection to the SDK, and then the event map, which decides what events can you call from the SDK. As you would remember from the previous video, when we dig deeper into the SDK, whenever the UI was initialized, we dispatched an event called UI ready, and that event is called by the standard UI here, to basically kickstart your UI. This is how we do it to basically make your UI or standard UI or any of the UI eligible to listen to events. What you need to do is you need to do the equivalent of this. Like this is for React, you can do it for your own Angular or Vue app. You can do window.empiria.events and place it into a target or the window, depending on which one is available, because if you are testing it live, window.empiria.events would be available. But if you are building the UI standalone, then obviously the window object would be only available, window.empiria would not be available. So you add an event listener to the app that says from experience, and what it does, it starts listening from any events that have the tag called from experience, and this is the exact name that we use from the SDK to send events, right? For example, if the send SDK sent an event called UI ready, what it would do, it would defer that to the event listener. The event listener would that basically categorize that event as an intercepted event, custom event, and then get event type from the event, and then event data, and then check in your event map whether that event name exists or not. So for example, if I was sending UI ready or even open welcome, it would go and execute this function, which basically in turns is just setting your welcome data, and then making the model true. Now you would be noticing, if you remember, that we set data variables in the SDK, like we did set UI config. So window.empiria.data.ui config has all of the models called welcome, overlay, and all of that, right? But we want to access welcome here, so we use welcome. But if you are testing in a standalone way, you can also have fallback data, which I have created here. So it has all of the fallback data, like UI config has a welcome object that you can fall back to for testing purposes. But initially, if this were to run in an deployed environment, your window.mpedia.data.ui.ui config and the welcome key would be used as the primary source because it's the first one in the expression. So that is how you receive events on the standard UI from SDK and basically do actions. Now these actions can include anything like opening iframe models, changing languages, and you can make your own components or continue with this. And this comprises of all of the types that you can extend, all of the interfaces that you would need, and you can extend these as well. Plus, it has already themed to bias using Chakra. These are the endpoints that you can use to make it responsive. You can find a lot of out of the box styles, a lot of out of the box icons that we're using readily available. Then you can find your product drawer and even your models, your overlay, your instructions, some common components as well. Other than that, it comprises of some of the assets as well, where we are providing you with the Montserrat font, some images that are useful, and then obviously videos that are used in instructions, right? So that is about the standard UI. Coming on to how it works is basically we would have to go into packet.json. There are three environments that we are using: development, production, and staging. You can run each of these depending on the script that you're executing, and you can build each of these depending on the script you're using to execute your build command, right? Um, there is a little bit of a caveat with the build process of renaming files from hash files to what it they should actually be. But we'll cover that later in the video somewhere. But yeah, that is about the standard UI, and you can use it to extend your functionality. And to use it, what you simply have to do is just go to GitHub or even open this URL here, and then just fork it from right here and then start working on it. About deploying your forked standard UI repository, for example, if you were an organization named XYZ and you fork it and call it XYZ-UI, and now you want to deploy it to use as a URL when embedding the experience, what you would need to do, which would be provided in some time, there would be an endpoint provided in the description in some time and in the documentation as well, which you can hit with your build files, and it would return you the URL that you need to use to deploy your or to add your UI to your experience. It would be something like you would take this you would take let me think, I closed it. You would take basically this build folder of yours, and then you would basically send it to an endpoint, and it would return you a result that would be looking pretty similar to a URL that looks like this. Like you would get something like this, but you would be asked to provide your UI name and the mode that you developed it in. For example, if you wanted to update your development API, development build, you would hit the API with the new build and your UI name, and then the mode it was built on. So we can update the UI for you, and then your URL keeps the same, and the UI gets updated. And that is how you would take advantage of the Imperia's infrastructure to deploy your own UI. Just get a URL in return, and then you can use that URL right here to update or to use your own UI. Now, moving on is the more fun part is that what if you want to build your own UI, right? Is very important here is that attaching a custom interface is for only allowed on pro plans and above, because the changing of the user interface is only available when you embed through the SDK, and that is only applicable when you basically are a paid user, right? So yeah, let's just start. What would you do? What would you require if you need to build your own UI? First of all, you would require a framework that you would need to choose from, and in our case, it's React, but you can choose any one of these or anyone that you are comfortable working with. You can choose one of those. Then comes a very important point in this building your own custom user base, and even when you extend a standard UI, this should be kept in mind is that since the UI layer and the experience layer live parallel, you can't really position the UI relatively, because your experience or the 3D world is positioned absolutely. So if you do styling with relative positioning or flexbox style, the UI would basically get lost behind the experience or the 3D world. You would need to have you need to style your elements with fixed or absolute positioning, but that is only reserved to your parent element. So for example, if I had um, a simple box that would look like this, and it has some children right here, but I wanted to come on top of my experience. I would just position this guy as absolute and then give some top, left, right, and bottom properties to make it align where however I wanted to. But I wouldn't have to do that for the children, because this guy would be appearing on top of the experience, and whatever is inside would also be appearing on top of the experience. Secondly, the big thing is that if, for example, you have two elements in your UI, for example, one is model A and second is model B, but you want the model A to have higher priority than model B, then you should set Z indexes as well. Z index basically is a CSS property. It can help you order your elements. So, for example, if I control Z this and then have two boxes in here and give the index 1 to this guy and the index 2 to this guy would always have the priority to appear above the one that has the index 1. That is how you would treat these positioned absolutely or fixed position elements, and give one priority over another while styling it. That is a little caveat in all of this. Regarding styling, I've also given an example of a navbar component that you can use to basically kickstart your development, which is built in Chakra. But if you're not using Chakra UI and you want to use HTML, JS, and CSS, you can do it in this way as well. This would be referenced in the description, the documentation that we're currently going through. Secondly, the major building block of this custom UI, or even the UI that you fork from standard UI, is basically the build process. Build that comes from React or any of the libraries look like this, right? Where you have your CSS files and your GS files, right? This static build. But this cannot be used by the SDK, because every time you update or make a new build, we can't really change the hash on the SDK side. Hence, we are using predefined names for the files on the SDK side and renaming the files on our end when a user interface is created. If you're using vanilla JS build, you can just rename your file to main.js and main.css manually. And if you're using a React or a library, you can name them manually and then upload them to our buckets or to your account. Or the second option, which is more viable, is that the one we discussed before, that you can send the build to an endpoint that we would provide with your UI name and the development environment, and we'll return you with a URL that you can use to basically use your UI in your experience, right? Yeah, and now moving on to probably the most important part of your building your own UI, since when you fork from standard UI, the communication channel is already built with the SDK, but when you are creating your own UI, you have to build it by yourself. So for example, if I had this very little app in which there was a box which I need to display when something is clicked inside the experience, let's just say display me, and it is positioned absolute as I previously mentioned, and then it has a top of, for example, 10 pixel, and I need to display it when they click a button from the experience, right? Now clicking a button from the experience and how does that reach the SDK would be talked in a later stage of the video, or maybe the next video. But how does or but to talk about how would the UI receive that information from the SDK is more important right now, and we're going to discuss that. So let me just make a state which says make visible, and then obviously use this to just show the component right here. Um, and let's keep this false by default, right? Now what we need to make to happen is, you can even refer to the standard UI for this. If you don't remember the code exactly, I'm going to come here and just copy this use effect right here, so I can use this as it is for less hassle, and go to my event map and then copy my event map as well. Or you can create a new one, and I'm just going to call a function that says open box, and then it is going to basically just you can even make a function out of it, like this. and be done with it. Or what you can do is you can do this directly here if you don't have any further computation to do. But I like to do it in this way. So I have, if in future I have to do some kind of computation, I have the access to the function where I'm setting the state to true, right? So right now you will be seeing that it is giving an error that expected 0 arguments but got 1. This is because the function right now that has is expecting none of the arguments. But for example, if we had an event called open box with args, and then it actually had argument um, one as a string, let's just say. And for right now, let's just say it's just console logs that um, arg1. Now you see it is not giving that error because there are two types of events now. Whenever you would attach or you would call this function from your experience, and we'll see how we want to do that. It would go to the SDK and tell the SDK to send that event to the UI. When the SDK would send that event to the UI, this would listen it right here and then pass it along to the event map, and then that would basically open your or make your box visible, right? So let's just try it out and see how does this work. So so let's just run it. As you can see, there is nothing visible here because I have not called the function yet. One thing to keep in mind here, since I have ran the app standalone, window.emperia.events does not exist right now, so it's going to fall back to the window object, right? And if I do window dot um, dispatch event and then create a new custom event called from experience, as it is accepting events from experience, and just give it the name that I want to pass it. For example, the name of my function is open box. If I pass it this function, you can see this becomes visible, right? Because it worked. And if I do the same but with this function which has an argument, if I do it with this, it's not going to do anything because I'm not passing any argument, you see. But if I pass an argument called data, um, which says please console me, and then enter it, you see it consoles your argument as I asked it to console your argument. In the same way, if you have a function with multiple arguments, you can just pass those to the function with multiple arguments. But to make it work, we need to add an additional data. You can add as much as data you want to during arguments, and then you pass that argument as a second parameter. So when I come here and console log this, you see there are two, it gets console logged, and it even works with two arguments. So number one is called data and number two is called additional data. You should remember this key because it is being used to access your data elements in the interceptor. So that is how you print these. Now that you've understood how the UI communicates with the SDK, but you've only seen the part where you listen from the SDK. There's another function that you can call to tell the SDK something which looks something like this. For example, previously you saw a function that used to change the language or the locale of the experience. So you can do window.emperia.events.dispatch event, and then you can create a new custom event which says from your user interface as your SDK is listening from it, and you can pass on the details. Like I'm passing the name of the function which I need to call in the SDK, and then the data that that function needs. So this is a very simple example of doing this. I'll be also uploading this repository or this example to GitHub and add it as in the description so you guys can play with it as well. But yeah, that is how the UI communicates to back and forth with the SDK. Moving on with the documentation, there are some best practices to follow when you're building your own UI. Is first of them is keeping your components segregated. For example, if something can be segregated as a separate element or separate component, you should do it. Keep everything light and simple. Build everything in such a way that changing one state or changing one variable or parameter doesn't re-render everything or doesn't have a lot of effect on the whole app. Secondly, make your components very, very, you can say, directed towards one functionality. Make these as granular as possible and as reusable as you can do it. And then avoid overloading your app.tsx entry point, because in React, for example, with a lot of shared variables, instead of using variables, you could use ZooStand, like to share state across the whole app. So if there's a lot of app and you have to do a lot of prop drilling, which is basically passing down the data from the main file into the components and into their children, you can use ZooStand for that. And upcoming is the how to achieve performance. The first part is the doing the out of the box given strategies given by React. First of them is code splitting, which is basically just splitting your JS file into multiple files. So basically it only loads the JS file which it needs, and that is done by implementing lazy loading into your code, which you can easily Google and look at how to lazy load your components. And then other than that, you there is optimizing assets. Your fonts should be either hosted on a very good domain, or you can load your custom fonts. And if you want to load it, you should do it asynchronously, because it would then not block the other CSS or the HTML from rendering. Then there are images. In images, the easiest way to make an image performant is using WebP formats. But if you can't use WebP formats, then you should at least have the dimensions of your image follow the maximum width and height of your component. And same goes for the videos, that if your component is like 800 pixels taller and 500 pixels wider, you don't need to give it a 4K image, because it's not going to utilize all that pixelated information, because its maximum resolution is 800 into 500. So cut it down to that to save space and make it load faster. And then lastly is about deploying your custom user interface. It is the same as the endpoint that we're going to provide you guys with, that you can hit with your UI name and then the environment you want to deploy it for, and will return you with a URL that you can use in your embedding function to activate your UI and then see it in action. You guys can ask questions, and if anything is unclear, you can ask, and I'll try to respond as soon as possible. Yeah, that is our journey through the user interface part of the application. And then we'll in the next video we'll move on to the last video of the series, which is explaining the whole communication flow from your experience to your SDK and then to your UI, and vice versa, like from your UI to your SDK and then to your experience. And so yeah, looking forward to that, and I'll see you guys next time.